Montana Territory, 1872. The wind carried the scent of pine and wildflowers across the rolling prairie as the stagecoach rumbled into the dusty outpost of Silverhill. Valentine Miller watched it approach from the shadow of the livery stable, his hand instinctively touching the worn leather holster at his hip. At 25, Valentine had already seen enough of the West's cruelty to believe that trust was a luxury few could afford out here. The open country might offer freedom, but it also demanded constant vigilance. Another batch of dreamers and fools, he muttered to himself, leaning against the rough-hewn post. Valentine's sun-bronzed face remained impassive, but his clear blue eyes missed nothing. 3 years as a ranch hand had hardened his lean, athletic frame, while keeping him agile enough to break the wildest broncs in the territory. Despite the trail dust that clung to his dark woolen trousers and faded blue shirt, there was an undeniable handsome quality to his clean-shaven face, the strong jaw and straight nose that spoke of his mother's distant Spanish heritage. The stagecoach lurched to a halt before the town's only hotel, and Valentine found his attention drawn to the passengers disembarking. Most were the usual sort: merchants, land speculators, a few rough-looking men whose business Valentine preferred not to contemplate. But the last passenger made him straighten up from his casual slouch. She descended gracefully despite the impractical dress that Eastern women insisted on wearing out west. A traveling suit of dove gray, with modest blue trim that somehow enhanced rather than diminished her natural beauty. Her chestnut hair was pinned neatly beneath a small hat, though a few rebellious tendrils had escaped during the journey. Even from a distance, Valentine could see she couldn't be more than 22 or 23. Staying clear of that one, he reminded himself. Valentine had built his life around a simple truth. Attachment meant vulnerability, and vulnerability got men killed on the frontier. His parents' homestead had burned during a raid when he was 14, and the lesson had scorched itself into his soul as deeply as the flames had marked the land. Since then, he'd moved from ranch to ranch, never staying long enough to form connections, taking pride in needing no one. What he wanted was simple: to earn enough to buy his own small spread, to answer to no man, and to live by his own code. Love, family, permanence. These were dangerous illusions that the harsh realities of the West inevitably shattered. The young woman collected her traveling cases from the driver, her movements conveying a quiet competence that belied her fashionable appearance. Valentine found himself watching longer than he intended. "New schoolteacher, I reckon," said a gravelly voice beside him. Valentine glanced at Hank, the aging livery owner. "Town's been waiting on one since Mrs. Peterson left last winter." "Rebecca Turner," Hank continued, nodding toward the woman. "Mayor's been corresponding with her since April. Comes all the way from Boston with fancy ideas about education." Valentine grunted noncommittally, but his eyes lingered on Rebecca Turner as she disappeared into the hotel. Schoolteachers never lasted in frontier towns like Silverhill. They arrived full of Eastern optimism, then fled back to civilization once winter came and the realities of frontier life became clear. This one would be no different. 2 days later, Valentine found himself in town for supplies. He'd just finished loading sacks of flour into his wagon when a commotion erupted down the street. The Fleming brothers, local troublemakers who fancied themselves outlaws, were harassing someone outside the mercantile. Against his better judgment, Valentine moved closer, his hand resting near his holster. He found the schoolteacher trying to maintain her dignity as 3 drunken men blocked her path, her arms full of books and packages. "Surely gentlemen would allow a lady to pass," Rebecca Turner was saying, her voice steady despite the obvious threat. "Ain't no ladies out here, just women," the oldest Fleming brother slurred, reaching for one of her packages. Valentine stepped forward before conscious thought could intervene. "That's enough, Fleming." 3 heads turned toward him, expressions darkening with recognition. "This ain't your business, Miller," the middle brother growled. "I'm making it my business." Valentine's voice remained even, but his stance shifted subtly, weight balanced to draw if necessary. "The lady asked you to move." The moment stretched taut as a lariat, then broke when the oldest Fleming spat in the dirt. "Come on, boys. Ain't worth getting shot over some uppity schoolmarm." As they shuffled away, Valentine turned to Rebecca, expecting gratitude. Instead, he found cool assessment in her hazel eyes. "I appreciate your intervention, mister. Miller. Valentine Miller. He tipped his hat slightly. Mr. Miller. Though I should mention I was handling the situation. Valentine raised an eyebrow. Those men aren't known for their restraint, Miss Turner. A flicker of surprise crossed her features. You know my name? Small town, he said with a shrug. News travels. Indeed. She adjusted her packages. Well, thank you regardless. I'm still becoming acquainted with local customs. Something in her dignified composure made Valentine offer. Let me help you with those. There's no need. It's no trouble. My wagon's right there. After a moment's hesitation, she handed him several of the heavier packages. As they walked, Valentine found himself studying her profile. Up close, her features were even more striking. High cheekbones, a delicately shaped mouth, and those remarkable hazel eyes that shifted between green and amber in the sunlight. How long have you been in Silverhill, Mr. Miller? She asked. About 6 months. I work at the Circle M Ranch. And before that, here and there. Valentine kept his tone deliberately vague. You won't stay long either, I expect. Rebecca gave him a sharp look. Why do you say that? School teachers rarely do. By winter, most are heading back east. I'm not most school teachers. There was a quiet certainty in her voice that made Valentine reconsider her. They reached the small building that served as Silverhill's schoolhouse and parsonage combined. As Valentine set her packages down, Rebecca said, Thank you again. Though I must ask, why did you help me? You don't seem the type to involve yourself in others' troubles. The question caught him off guard. Decent thing to do, he answered simply. Is that all? Her gaze was uncomfortably perceptive. Valentine stepped back, suddenly aware he'd lingered too long. Good day, Miss Turner. As he walked away, Valentine couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in his carefully ordered world. He told himself it was merely curiosity about a newcomer, nothing more. The last thing he needed was to concern himself with a schoolteacher who would be gone before the first snow. But that night, as he lay in his bunk at the ranch bunkhouse, Valentine found himself remembering the determined set of Rebecca Turner's jaw and the intelligence in those remarkable eyes. It troubled him more than he cared to admit. The following Sunday found Valentine reluctantly attending church services, more to please his employer's wife than from personal devotion. He slipped into the back row just as the congregation began singing. Halfway through the first hymn, he spotted Rebecca Turner seated among the town's respectable women, her voice rising clear and true above the others. After the service, people lingered to socialize. Valentine was preparing to make his escape when Mrs. Walker, the rancher's wife, intercepted him. Valentine, have you met our new schoolteacher? Before he could answer, she was leading him toward Rebecca, who stood conversing with the mayor's wife. Miss Turner, this is Valentine Miller, one of our most reliable ranch hands. Rebecca smiled politely. Mr. Miller and I have met, actually. Oh, how wonderful. Mrs. Walker beamed. Miss Turner is organizing a town social to raise funds for school supplies. Perhaps you could assist? Valentine shifted uncomfortably. I'm not much for socials, ma'am. Nonsense. Everyone needs community, Valentine. Even dedicated loners like yourself. Mrs. Walker's tone brooked no argument. The social is Saturday next. I'll tell Mr. Walker you're available to help. As Mrs. Walker moved on to her next victim, Valentine found himself momentarily alone with Rebecca. You needn't feel obligated, she said softly. Mrs. Walker doesn't understand the meaning of no. A smile tugged at Rebecca's lips. I've noticed. But the children genuinely need the supplies. Valentine studied her. Why Silverhill? There must be schools back east that would welcome someone of your education. Rebecca's expression grew distant. I wanted somewhere different. Somewhere I could make a real difference. Most who come west are running from something, Valentine observed. Her eyes met his directly. Or towards something, Mr. Miller. Before he could respond, the mayor approached to discuss school business, leaving Valentine with the unsettling feeling that Rebecca Turner saw more than he wished to reveal. The evening of the social arrived clear and mild. Valentine had spent the day helping construct makeshift tables in the town square and now stood awkwardly at the periphery, watching townsfolk gather by lantern light. Children darted between adults, women laid out food on the tables, and men clustered in groups, discussing cattle prices and water rights. Rebecca moved through the crowd with surprising ease for a newcomer, her simple blue dress catching the golden lantern light. Valentine found his eyes following her despite his best intentions. "Quit staring and go talk to her," came a voice at his elbow. Valentine glanced down to find 12-year-old Tommy Wilson, the ranch foreman's son, giving him a knowing look. "I'm not staring," Valentine protested. "Sure," Tommy grinned. "Just like I wasn't staring when Lizzie Peterson wore her yellow dress to Sunday school." Valentine suppressed a smile. "Shouldn't you be helping your mother? Shouldn't you be asking Miss Turner to dance?" As if conjured by their conversation, Rebecca appeared before them. "Tommy, your mother's looking for you." As the boy scampered off, she turned to Valentine. "You've been standing here all evening, Mr. Miller." "Just doing my duty. By holding up this particular section of fence." Her eyes sparkled with amusement. "Someone has to," he replied, fighting an unexpected urge to smile. "Well, your fence guarding services are temporarily required elsewhere. Mrs. Baker's punch bowl needs rescuing from that table before it collapses." Valentine glanced where she indicated and saw the precariously balanced table. "I suppose duty calls." As they walked together, Rebecca asked, "How did you become a cowboy, Mr. Miller?" "Never set out to be one. Just work that needed doing." "And before that?" Valentine hesitated. He rarely spoke of his past, yet found himself answering, "My family had a small homestead near the Kansas border. After they died, I worked wherever I could." "I'm sorry," she said simply. "It was a long time ago." Valentine carefully moved the heavy punch bowl to stable ground. "Thank you." Rebecca remained beside him. "Would it violate your principles of solitude terribly if you joined us for the dancing?" Valentine looked at her in surprise. "I don't dance. Everyone can dance. Some just need more practice than others." "Miss Turner, Rebecca, please. We're at a social, not a funeral." "Rebecca," he conceded, the name feeling strangely intimate. "I'm not suited for this sort of gathering." "Because you prefer being alone?" She studied him. "Or because you've convinced yourself you should be?" The question struck uncomfortably close to truths Valentine avoided examining. Before he could formulate a response, a fiddle struck up a lively tune, and Rebecca was pulled away by enthusiastic schoolchildren. Throughout the evening, Valentine found himself drawn into conversations and activities despite his intentions to remain detached. He helped serve food, judged a children's sack race, and even reluctantly joined a Virginia reel when partners were scarce. Each time he encountered Rebecca, she greeted him with a warmth that gradually wore away at his reserve. As twilight deepened into night, Valentine found himself standing beside Rebecca at the edge of the gathering, watching the townsfolk dance. "You've survived the evening admirably," she observed. "Barely," he replied, though without his earlier defensiveness. "Will you walk me to the schoolhouse? It's getting late." Valentine hesitated only briefly before offering his arm. They walked in comfortable silence through the quiet streets, the sounds of the social fading behind them. The night air carried the scent of sage and distant rain. "Thank you for your help today," Rebecca said as they reached the schoolhouse. The children were delighted with the event. "They seem fond of you." Children are easier to win over than adults. They haven't yet decided that vulnerability is dangerous. Valentine glanced at her sharply. "Sometimes it is. And sometimes what we think protects us actually imprisons us." Rebecca turned to face him fully. "Why are you so determined to remain apart from everyone, Valentine?" The use of his given name startled him. "Experience," he answered simply. "What happened to your family?" Valentine stared into the darkness beyond her shoulder. He rarely spoke of it, yet found himself saying, "Raid during the border troubles. I was hunting when it happened. Came back to find everything burning." Rebecca's hand touched his arm lightly. "And you've been running ever since." "Not running. Being practical. Attachments are liabilities out here. They're also what make life worth living." Her voice softened. "Even on the frontier." Valentine looked down at her, suddenly aware of how close they stood. For one unguarded moment, he allowed himself to imagine what it might be like to belong somewhere, to someone. The thought terrified and attracted him in equal measure. "Good night, Miss Turner," he said, stepping back. "Good night, Mr. Miller." She entered the schoolhouse, leaving Valentine with troubling thoughts that followed him all the way back to the ranch. The weeks that followed brought an unexpected shift in Valentine's carefully structured existence. He found reasons to visit town more frequently, supplies the ranch needed, messages to deliver, repairs to the schoolhouse roof that mysteriously required his specific expertise. Each time, he encountered Rebecca, and each conversation chipped away at his conviction that distance equaled safety. One October afternoon, Valentine was repairing a loose board on the schoolhouse steps when Rebecca emerged with an armful of student essays. "This is the third repair you've made this month," she observed, sitting beside him on the steps. "Either this building is falling apart, or you've developed a sudden passion for carpentry." Valentine concentrated on hammering a nail. "Just being helpful." Rebecca shuffled through her papers. "Tommy Wilson wrote quite an interesting essay about cattle driving. I suspect he had assistance from an expert. Kid's curious. Asks a lot of questions when I'm checking fence lines." Rebecca smiled. "You've become his hero, you know." Valentine looked up in surprise. "That's foolish. Children have good instincts about people." She hesitated. "I'm taking the students on a nature study expedition Saturday. We could use an additional chaperone familiar with local terrain." "Thought you were just passing through," Valentine said, remembering her words from their first real conversation. "Staying until something better comes along." "I never said that," Rebecca protested. "Not in those words. But you're not planning to stay permanently." Rebecca's expression grew thoughtful. "I honestly don't know. I came west because I needed space. To decide what I truly wanted." "And have you decided?" "I'm beginning to." Her gaze held his for a moment longer than necessary. "Will you help with the expedition?" Valentine knew he should refuse. Getting involved with the school, with Rebecca, went against everything he'd promised himself. Yet he found himself nodding. Saturday dawned clear and cool. Valentine arrived at the schoolhouse to find Rebecca organizing 15 excited children into pairs. She wore a practical divided riding skirt and boots, her hair braided simply down her back. The sight of her, so different from the proper schoolteacher who'd first arrived, made Valentine pause. "Mr. Miller will be leading us to Cottonwood Creek," Rebecca announced. "Remember our rules. Stay with your partner, no wandering off, and listen for instructions." The children regarded Valentine with varying degrees of curiosity and awe as he helped them mount the wagon he'd borrowed from the ranch. Rebecca climbed up beside him on the driver's seat, her shoulder brushing his as she settled the blanket across her lap. "Thank you for doing this," she said quietly. "The children have been studying river ecosystems." Valentine flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion. "You're different with them." "The children." "Different how?" "More yourself, somehow." Rebecca considered this. "Teaching was expected in my family. My mother taught, my aunts taught. But working with children, that was my choice. They remind me what matters." "And what's that?" "Wonder. Questions. Seeing the world fresh." She glanced at him. "When did you stop looking at the world that way, Valentine?" The question hung between them as they traveled the rutted trail to Cottonwood Creek. Behind them, the children sang songs and pointed out jackrabbits and hawks. Valentine found himself noticing details he typically ignored: the particular blue of the October sky, the way sunlight filtered through cottonwood leaves, the sound of children's laughter. At the creek, Rebecca organized the students into research groups while Valentine secured the horses. He watched as she knelt beside a group of girls, examining something in the shallow water, her face animated with genuine interest. Tommy Wilson sidled up beside him. "Miss Turner says you're helping her with a special project." Valentine raised an eyebrow. "Does she?" "She needs a man who knows about building things. For the new school edition." Tommy looked at him slyly. "Pa says you've been mooning over her like a lovesick calf." Valentine felt heat rise in his face. "Your pa talks too much. So you do like her?" Tommy grinned triumphantly. "Shouldn't you be studying rocks or something?" "Already did. Found these." Tommy proudly displayed several fossils. "Miss Turner says they're from ancient sea creatures, from when all this was underwater." Valentine examined the spiral-shaped impressions. "Looks like it." "Miss Turner knows everything," Tommy declared. "She's not like other grown-ups. She actually listens." Valentine glanced at Rebecca, who was now helping students sketch in their notebooks. "She's different," he agreed quietly. The peaceful expedition shattered moments later when a scream rang out from downstream. Valentine was running before he consciously registered the sound, Rebecca close behind him. They found two girls standing terrified on the creek bank, pointing to the water where a third child flailed in a deeper pool, caught by the current. Without hesitation, Valentine plunged into the creek. The water was shockingly cold, the current stronger than it appeared. He reached the struggling child, little Mary Peterson, just as she went under. Grabbing her dress, He pulled her to the surface, fighting the current to reach the bank where Rebecca waited. Together they pulled Mary onto dry ground. The child coughed up water, then began crying. Rebecca wrapped her in a blanket, checking for injuries while Valentine stood dripping and breathing hard. "You're safe now," Rebecca soothed the child. "Mr. Miller got you in time." Mary looked up at Valentine with wide eyes. "You saved me." Valentine knelt awkwardly beside her. "You're all right now. Just stay away from that deep part." Once Mary had calmed and rejoined her friends, Rebecca turned to Valentine, her face pale. "Thank you. If you hadn't been here, but I was," Valentine interrupted, uncomfortable with her gratitude. Rebecca surprised him by taking his hand. "Yes, you were." The simple words carried a weight of meaning that Valentine wasn't prepared to examine. The incident cast a shadow over the expedition, and they soon gathered the children to return to town. As they drove back, Valentine noticed Rebecca shivering despite the blanket. "Take my coat," he offered, already shrugging out of it. "I'm fine, really. You're cold. Take it." He draped the coat around her shoulders, his fingers lingering briefly. "Always the protector," she murmured. "Force of habit." Rebecca studied him. "Is that why you stay apart?" "To protect yourself from loss." Valentine kept his eyes on the trail ahead. What happened to those girls could have been worse. Out here, danger's always one mistake away. "So is happiness," Rebecca countered softly. They rode in silence for several minutes before she added, "I had a fiancé back east. Charles. Everything was arranged, the wedding, our future. He had his father's law practice waiting, and I was expected to be the perfect lawyer's wife." Valentine glanced at her in surprise. "What happened?" "I realized I was living someone else's life, following a path others had chosen." Rebecca's fingers twisted in her lap. 2 weeks before the wedding, I broke our engagement and took the teaching position here." "That took courage," Valentine observed. "Or cowardice. Sometimes I'm not sure which." She met his gaze. "But I knew I couldn't spend my life wondering what might have been if I'd been brave enough to choose my own path." Something in her words resonated with Valentine, touching on questions he'd buried years ago. Before he could respond, they arrived at the schoolhouse where parents waited anxiously, having heard about the creek incident through the town's efficient gossip network. As Valentine helped the children down from the wagon, he found himself the unexpected recipient of parental gratitude. Mrs. Peterson tearfully clasped his hand, thanking him for saving her daughter. Other parents added their appreciation, and Valentine stood awkwardly in the center of attention he typically avoided. Later, after the children had dispersed and Valentine was preparing to return the wagon to the ranch, Rebecca approached him. "You've become the town hero," she said with a small smile. "Hardly." Valentine adjusted the horses' harnesses. "Anyone would have done the same. But not everyone could have." Rebecca stepped closer. "Mary's alive because you were there." Valentine looked at her, suddenly understanding something that had eluded him. "You don't see the West as I do you? As something to survive. I see it as somewhere to live." Fully. Her eyes held his. "Dinner. Tonight. At my quarters. A proper thank you for today." Valentine knew he should refuse. The walls he'd built around himself had already developed dangerous cracks where Rebecca Turner was concerned. Yet he heard himself say, "I'll bring wine." That evening marked a turning point. Over a simple meal in Rebecca's modest quarters attached to the schoolhouse, Valentine found himself speaking of things he rarely shared: his childhood on the homestead, his parents' dreams for the land, his wandering years after their death. Rebecca listened without judgment, offering her own stories of stifling Boston society and her gradual realization that she wanted more than the prescribed path. "Do you never think of settling somewhere?" she asked as they sat before the small fireplace, the remains of dinner cleared away. "Finding a place to call your own?" Valentine swirled the wine in his glass. "Used to dream of my own spread. Modest place, good water, enough stock to live on. But not anymore. Dreams are luxuries out here." Rebecca leaned forward. "They're necessities, Valentine. Without them, what are we surviving for?" Her question lingered in Valentine's mind long after he'd bid her goodnight and ridden back to the ranch. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to imagine a different kind of life. One with roots, with connection, with someone to share the burdens and joys alike. The thought terrified him. As autumn deepened toward winter, Valentine found himself drawn increasingly into Silverhill's community life, always with Rebecca at the center of his changing world. He helped organize the Thanksgiving celebration at the school, repaired the church roof alongside other townsmen, and even reluctantly participated in a Christmas pageant when the intended Joseph fell ill. With each passing week, the walls he'd built seemed less like protection and more like prison bars. Yet old fears died hard, and Valentine maintained a careful distance even as his feelings for Rebecca grew beyond anything he could safely ignore. 2 days before Christmas, a fierce blizzard swept through the region. Valentine and the other ranch hands worked desperately to bring cattle to sheltered areas, fighting wind-driven snow that made it impossible to see more than a few feet ahead. When they finally returned to the ranch house, exhausted and half-frozen, news awaited that made Valentine's blood run cold. Ryder from town says the schoolhouse roofs partly collapsed from snow weight, the foreman reported. Miss Turner was inside when it happened. Valentine was on his horse before the man finished speaking, deaf to warnings about riding in the storm. The 5 miles to town were a white nightmare of howling wind and numbing cold, but Valentine pressed on, fear driving him forward when sense would have turned back. He found the schoolhouse, surrounded by townspeople working to clear debris. The roof over the classroom had indeed collapsed, though the attached living quarters remained intact. Valentine pushed through the crowd. "Where is she?" he demanded of the mayor. "At the doctor's. Hurt her leg when the beams came down, but she'll recover." Valentine was already moving toward the doctor's house, heart hammering. He found Rebecca propped up on an examination table, her face pale but composed as Dr. Patterson wrapped her leg. "Valentine," she said, surprise and something warmer lighting her eyes. "You shouldn't have come in this weather. Are you all right?" He moved to her side, barely noticing the others in the room. "Just a bad sprain and some bruises." "I was fortunate." She reached for his hand. "You're half frozen." Dr. Patterson cleared his throat. "Miss Turner needs rest, and you need warming up before you catch your death. Martha's got coffee in the kitchen." Valentine reluctantly stepped back, suddenly aware of how his actions must appear to others. "I'll check on the schoolhouse repairs." "Wait," Rebecca called as he turned to leave. The children's Christmas gifts were in the classroom. I'd made something for each of them. Her distress over the lost presents touched Valentine more deeply than concern for her own injuries. "I'll see what can be recovered," he promised. The next 2 days passed in a blur of activity. Valentine joined the town's efforts to clear and temporarily repair the schoolhouse roof. He salvaged what he could of Rebecca's classroom materials, including most of the children's gifts. When he learned she couldn't return to her quarters until repairs were completed, he found himself offering the ranch's unused guest room, securing Mrs. Walker's enthusiastic approval. "Of course the poor dear must stay with us through Christmas," Mrs. Walker declared. "I'll send the wagon for her immediately." On Christmas Eve, the ranch house glowed with warmth and light. Rebecca, her injured leg propped on a footstool, sat by the great stone fireplace as ranch hands and neighbors gathered for the Walkers' traditional celebration. Valentine watched from across the room as she laughed with Mrs. Walker, the firelight catching auburn highlights in her chestnut hair. "Quite a woman," Mr. Walker said, following Valentine's gaze. "Got more spine than half the men in the territory." Valentine nodded. "She does. Planning to do anything about it? Or just stare all evening?" Valentine glanced at his employer in surprise. Walker chuckled. "Not blind, son. Neither is anyone else who's seen you two together." Before Valentine could respond, Mrs. Walker called everyone to gather for carols. Valentine found himself standing near Rebecca as the group sang Silent Night, her clear voice rising alongside his deeper one. As the evening wound down and guests departed, Valentine helped Rebecca to the guest room. Her hand rested lightly on his arm as she navigated the hallway with her injured leg. "Thank you," she said as they reached her door, "for everything these past few days." "It was nothing. It was everything, Valentine." Rebecca's gaze held his. "You rode through a blizzard without a second thought. You saved the children's presents. You've been here every moment I needed help." Valentine looked away, uncomfortable with her gratitude. "Anyone would have, no." She touched his cheek, turning his face back toward hers. "Not anyone. You." The tenderness in her eyes undid him. Without conscious thought, Valentine leaned down and kissed her softly. Rebecca's hand slid to his shoulder as she returned the kiss with a warmth that melted something frozen inside him. When they parted, Valentine whispered, "I shouldn't have done that." "Why not?" Rebecca's eyes searched his. "Because I'm not staying." I never stay. The words emerged automatically, an echo of the mantra he'd lived by for years. Where would you go that would be better than here? Than this? She gestured between them. What are you running from, Valentine? The question stripped away his defenses. From feeling this, he admitted roughly. From caring enough that losing it would destroy me. Rebecca's expression softened. So you destroy it first? Deny yourself any chance at happiness. It's safer. It's half-living. She took his hand, placing it over her heart. Feel that. It's terrifying to risk this. I know. I ran from Boston, from expectations, from a life that wasn't mine. But I'm tired of running. Valentine stood transfixed by the warmth of her beneath his palm and the truth of her words. I don't know how to stop, he confessed. Start by staying, she whispered. Just for now. He kissed her again, deeper this time, feeling something long dormant awakening in his soul. When they finally parted, Valentine rested his forehead against hers. Merry Christmas, Rebecca. She smiled. Merry Christmas, Valentine. He left her at her door, his mind and heart in turmoil. That night, lying awake in his bunkhouse bed, Valentine confronted the reality that Rebecca Turner had irrevocably changed him. The solitary existence he'd clung to now seemed hollow compared to the connection they shared. Yet old fears whispered that happiness was temporary, that loss was inevitable on the frontier. As winter yielded to spring, Valentine found himself at a crossroads. His feelings for Rebecca had deepened beyond anything he'd experienced, yet he maintained a careful emotional distance. They spent time together, riding on clear days, reading by the fire on stormy evenings, sharing simple meals in her restored quarters. He helped with school projects, and she brought light to his solitary existence. But whenever their connection deepened too much, Valentine retreated behind well-worn walls. Rebecca accepted his hesitation with understanding that only made him care for her more. When you're ready, she would say, never pushing but never retreating either. In April, as wildflowers began dotting the prairie, Valentine received news that changed everything. The small ranch neighboring Circle M was for sale. 200 acres with good water and modest improvements. The exact kind of place he'd once dreamed of owning. For days, Valentine wrestled with the opportunity. Buying the land would mean committing to Silverhill, to a future here. It would mean acknowledging that perhaps roots weren't chains, but anchors in life's storms. He rode out to the property alone, walking the boundaries and envisioning what could be built there. By the time he returned to Circle M, Valentine had made his decision. He arranged terms with the bank and signed the papers the following day, becoming a landowner for the first time since his parents' death. That evening, he rode to town to share the news with Rebecca. He found her in the schoolyard, supervising children planting a garden along the southern wall. I need to speak with you, he said quietly as he approached. Rebecca noted his serious expression. Children, continue with the planting. I'll check your work shortly. She walked with Valentine to a bench beneath the cottonwood tree that shaded the yard. What is it? I bought the old Matheson place. The words came out abruptly. 200 acres joining Circle M. Rebecca's eyes widened. Valentine, that's wonderful. Your own land at last. It needs work. House is barely standing, barn's worse. But the water's good and the grazing land is sound. When do you take possession? Already have. Moving my things out there next week. Valentine hesitated. It's a big project for one man. Rebecca studied him. Are you asking for help? I'm asking. Valentine took a deep breath. I'm asking if you'd consider sharing it. The work. The land. A life there. Understanding dawned in Rebecca's eyes. Valentine Miller, are you proposing to me? Poorly, it seems. He took her hands in his. I've spent years believing that caring for someone was dangerous, that roots would only give me more to lose. But these months with you, I've realized that without connection, without love, survival itself has no purpose. Rebecca's eyes glistened. Go on. Valentine smiled slightly. Now you want pretty words. I want your words. Your truth. My truth is that I love you, Rebecca Turner. That I want to build something with you. A home, a life, a family perhaps. That the thought of you leaving Silverhill. He swallowed hard. I can't imagine it. What if I told you I received an offer? A teaching position back east. Rebecca's expression revealed nothing. Valentine's heart contracted painfully, but he forced himself to answer honestly. I'd say that I hope you'll decline it. But if that's what you truly want, I'd understand. You always said you were just passing through. And you said you'd follow wherever I go. Rebecca's face softened. Do you remember that day? Valentine nodded, recalling the conversation months ago when Rebecca had mentioned possibly moving on someday, and he'd surprised himself by declaring he would follow. I do want to teach, Rebecca continued. But I want to teach here, in a community that's become home, with a man who's become. She touched his face gently. Everything. Valentine pulled her into his arms, relief and joy washing through him. Is that a yes? Yes, Rebecca whispered against his lips. Yes to all of it. They were married 3 weeks later in Silverhill's small church, the entire community turning out to celebrate. Valentine stood tall in a new suit as Rebecca walked toward him in a simple white dress adorned with wildflowers. Their vows, spoken clearly before friends who had become family, sealed a journey neither had expected when Rebecca's stagecoach first rolled into town. After the ceremony, as they greeted well-wishers, Tommy Wilson approached with a solemn expression. Does this mean you won't be our teacher anymore, Miss Turner? I mean, Mrs. Miller? Rebecca smiled. I'll always be your teacher, Tommy. Being married doesn't change that. Good. The boy nodded decisively. Mr. Miller needs someone smart to tell him what to do. Valentine laughed, surprising himself. Can't argue with that. As twilight fell, Valentine drove his bride to their new home. He'd worked tirelessly with friends from town and the ranch to make the old Matheson house habitable. The roof no longer leaked, the porch stood firm, and inside, new furnishings awaited, including a bookshelf Valentine had crafted himself for Rebecca's beloved books. At the threshold, Valentine lifted Rebecca into his arms. Welcome home, Mrs. Miller. Rebecca's arms tightened around his neck as she surveyed their modest kingdom. It's perfect. It will be, Valentine promised, carrying her inside. We'll build it together. Later, as they stood on the porch watching stars appear above their land, Rebecca leaned against her husband's shoulder. Did you ever imagine, when you watched my stagecoach arrive, that we'd end up here? Valentine shook his head. Never. I thought you were just passing through. And now? He turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands. Now I know some journeys lead exactly where we're meant to be. As Valentine kissed his wife beneath the vast Montana sky, he finally understood that the greatest courage wasn't in standing alone against the wilderness, but in opening his heart to love on the frontier. The walls he'd built had never truly protected him. They had only imprisoned him. In Rebecca's arms, he'd found not vulnerability, but strength. Not danger, but home. Together, on land that would nurture generations of Millers to come, they began their greatest adventure, not just surviving the West, but truly living in it, bound by a love as enduring as the mountains on the horizon and as deep as the roots they'd finally allowed themselves to grow.